Well, I know it's been a while, but welcome back to part 3 of the video series, Issues You May Run Into with Your Lifted 4Runner. In the first 2 videos, we talked about issues with the upper control arms, loose steering, coilover installation, and driveline vibrations. In this third edition, we're going to go over a few more issues that relate to rear end handling and ride issues, and then we're going to talk about some tire rubbing fixes. So let's get on into it. So first up, I'd like to spend some time talking about the problems you may run into in regards to the handling of the rear end of your 4Runner after lifting it. Some people report things about it feeling loose, wobbly, maybe unstable. In addition to this, people also seem to notice that when they go over bumps or drive through dips at speed, they notice the rear end wanting to kick to one side. Well, we have some solid ways to mitigate these issues. When you lift your 4Runner, most likely the kit you get is not going to include new sway bar end links. In the rear, the stock end links are far too short for the distance needed after raising the vehicle. Though this issue is not catastrophic, it can cause premature wear on your end link bushings, resulting in clanking noises and ultimately more body roll from a lack of performance of your rear sway bar. What we can do to fix this is order a set of front sway bar end links for the 3rd Gen 4Runner and use them on the rear of our 3rd Gen 4Runner. Sorry for the wordy description, but I want to be specific. These front links are about an inch or two longer than the rears and give us the end link and sway bar angle that we want once the vehicle is lifted. I've included a link to the ones I got in the description below, and they'll work great for you. Now to a more prominent issue in the rear after you've lifted your 4Runner. Ever notice after lifting the 4Runner that it feels like the rear end of it wants to shimmy sideways in the rear over a bump or maybe through a dip? If you take a measuring tape and you measure from the frame rail out to the outer edge of your tire on both the left and right side, you'll notice a difference in that measurement. After lifting your 4Runner, your rear end is effectively pushed to the right and is no longer centered perfectly underneath the vehicle. This is because the way our rear end is centered under the vehicle is by use of what's called a Panhard bar. This is a solid mounted bar that is attached to one end of the frame and the other end to the rear end housing. When we lift the vehicle, that raises the frame mount point up and the rear end housing stays at the same height, so the only way all this can line up is by shifting the rear end off center. There are 2 ways to mitigate this issue. One is by buying an adjustable Panhard bar, which this gives you the ability to dial in the length you need on the bar to center the rear end. Now, in my opinion, and many others, this is the less desirable method. The better method is to purchase what's called a Panhard Correction Kit. This item is made by a fellow who goes by the name of I'm Keith on the forums, and that's EIMKEITH. He's a very smart dude who's figured out the best way to go about fixing this issue. What he created are 2 brackets that fit directly into the stock Panhard bar mounting points, and they lower the frame mounting point and raise the rear end mounting point. The moving of this mount point allows us to get the bar virtually level with the ground, which is what we want for our best rear axle position relative to the vehicle. This set of brackets must be welded to your frame and rear end housing. Though this is not an extremely intricate weld job, it does need to be done by someone with welding experience, as this is a nearly permanent installation and you want it to be done correctly for the best strength. We're talking about a safety issue here if one of the mounting points were to become cracked or broken away. I'm not going to go into the details of the installation, as there are plenty of install videos out there already, the best being, in my opinion, done by Timmy the Toolman. I will include a link to that in the description below. So with these 2 items taken care of, our rear ends should be in pretty good shape. Girl, who is you playing with? Back that thing up. So let's go on and move on to the next topic. The final thing I want to talk about is the age-old issue of our tires rubbing. We've all experienced it, and yeah, it sucks. The noise, the wear, and of course the literal issue of restricting the amount of flex we have when we're wheeling. Even with the 2.5 to 3 inch lift, you can run into rubbing with 33-inch tall tires. There are many variables to this that come into play, such as wheel offset, wheel width, and tire size, even the amount of lift. Generally, though, most people go with a 33-inch tire when lifting, and it's going to be on an 8 or a 9-inch wide wheel with somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 inches of back spacing or what we call a negative 12 millimeter offset. That's my setup, and this is my experience with solving any rubbing issues. The first thing we can do is look at our alignment. The worst rubbing, in my opinion, is the pinch weld in the back of the fender. This can do the most damage to our 4Runners as well as to our tires. The best way to start for success comes down to our alignment setting. Our caster is what positions the wheel in the fender well from front to back. Not only does more positive caster give us a little bit better handling, but it also pushes the wheel further forward in the fender wells, getting us further away from the pinch weld in the back. Strive to get the most positive caster you can when you're getting your vehicle aligned. If you're still having issues with rubbing in the pinch weld, there's one other thing we can do. Take your inner fender liner off and use a hammer to essentially fold the pinch weld over flat up against the body. Just use a good old hammer and hammer it down flat. This will give you more than a 1/4 inch more space for the tire to flex and usually fixes most people's issues. Once you're done, put the fender liner back and get on wheeling out there. Now, as I previously recommended shooting for the most positive caster we can get, this does push the wheels further forward into the fender well, causing more issues with rubbing in the front, especially for those with the larger fender flares. This problem is easily fixed though, either by going with an off-road bumper or simply by trimming the inside of the fender flares. You don't have to go crazy on the trimming, just use some snips or maybe a Dremel and do a little bit at a time on the inside of the flare, and you won't even be able to see it from the outside. If you go with an aftermarket off-road bumper, whether it be plate steel or tube or hybrid, you're not going to have any issue with this front rubbing at all. So that's it for part 3 of issues you may run into after lifting your 3rd Gen 4Runner. As always, I hope this helps you guys out and you got some enjoyment out of it. Get out there and enjoy your newly lifted 4Runner, whether it be in the garage, on the road, or on the trails. Thank you all for checking it out, and y'all take it easy.